Hello, welcome to Arthritis Sit at Home.
Hello, how are you?
We're good. And on today's episode, as you can see, we have Michael Mallinson with us, past president of the Canadian Spondylitis Association, and currently one of the leading volunteers at the Axial Spondyloarthritis International Federation, otherwise known as ASIF, where Michael has served as his past secretary and past trustee. Michael, welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Well, you're welcome. It's a pleasure to be here.
We're going to talk about ASIF to start off, and I guess we'd like to know, first of all, a little bit more about it, and how did you get involved?
Good, yes. ASIF, as you said, stands for Axial Spondyloarthritis International Federation. And first point is that we actually changed our name last year from Ankylosing Spondylitis International Federation because the term axSpA or Axial Spondyloarthritis is coming more into fashion and is more inclusive of patients who have the spectrum of axial spondyloarthritis disease, which we can talk about a little later. Prior to my involvement with ASIF, ASIF used to really just run council meetings, which were educational and network sessions for its members, and they would have those every 2 or 3 years. I got involved in 2011 when I took over as secretary of ASIF from Ken Mulholland, who had been the president of the Ontario Spondylitis Association. I served 5 years as secretary and then retired, because at that time, to be an executive of ASIF, you had to be an executive of your domestic association, and I knew that I was going to be retiring from the Canadian Spondylitis Association. But I also saw that there was a huge need for some experience and history to stick around with ASIF, because the president had changed, a number of the trustees had changed. So I offered my services as a volunteer, and that was eagerly taken up because ASIF has long talked about projects, but as an all-volunteer organization, it was never really able to execute on them. So, it just wanted human resources in order to move forward, and that's really how I got involved. I had ceased to be president of the Canadian Spondylitis Association. I knew a lot about our disease, and I could see that there was a need for volunteers with ASIF.
International Federation sounds very impressive. What does the membership consist of?
Our membership consists of patient organizations, many of which are specific disease organizations. That is, they are specifically for ankylosing spondylitis or axial spondyloarthritis patients. But some of them are not. Some of them are more umbrella arthritis organizations that cater to patients with other forms of arthritis, but they include axSpA patients within their membership. So we have 47 members now from 41 countries.
I'm not sure if it's 41 or 42 because as of last week, Arthritis Consumer Experts is now a proud new member of ASIF.
You are. We're very pleased to welcome you on board. Actually, it didn't increase our country count because the Canadian Spondylitis Association was already a member of ASIF. Yes.
Well, we're proud new members. And before we talk a little bit more about ASIF and some of those programs and initiatives that you were referring to, I wouldn't mind going back and maybe putting a spotlight on the disease right now. And I guess the first thing that you touched upon is that for a lot of our viewers, we understand there are a number of types and names that fall under the umbrella of axial spondyloarthritis. I'm wondering if you could take us through what I think you described as the spectrum.
Yes. The terminology has changed quite a lot over the years. Axial spondyloarthritis is not just a unique name for the disease. It's been called all sorts of other diseases like Marie-Strontial disease, Morbus-Bechterew disease, etc. But I would say, by about 15 years ago, most people are tending to use the term ankylosing spondylitis. But what changed was the technology. And ankylosing spondylitis, by definition, had to be visible on X-ray. So you had to have sacroiliitis that was imaged by X-ray, really, to help diagnose this. But people began to realize once MRI was introduced in the early 1980s that you could, in fact, see sacroiliitis within about 18 months to 2 years after disease onset, whereas with an X-ray, it takes 7 or 8 years to spot the same thing. So people came up with this idea that there was an early form of ankylosing spondylitis, and they referred to it as non-radiographic axial spondyloarthritis. And for quite a few years, it was thought of as kind of two different diseases because there's different elements to both aspects of that disease. But in the last year or two, researchers and leading clinicians have come to the conclusion that this is all one disease. It's a spectrum of disease, starting with non-radiographic, going through to radiographic or ankylosing spondylitis. It's even a little bit more complicated than that because there is a group of diseases called spondyloarthritis, which is split into two categories, axial and peripheral. So, for example, axial spondyloarthritis includes ankylosing spondylitis. Peripheral spondyloarthritis includes psoriatic arthritis. But then it depends on how it manifests itself as to whether it's called axial or peripheral. So you could have peripheral disease with axial involvement, or you could have undifferentiated with axial. So it's all interwoven, and that's why ASIF's mandate is to cater to people with axial spondyloarthritis and related diseases.
So that complexity, if I can use that term, would largely be responsible for that time to diagnosis that you identified.
Well, yes, in part. It is complex. There is no single diagnostic test. So you can't take a blood test or a gene test and say categorically that you have axial spondyloarthritis. And of course, it's inflammatory back disease. And most people go to their doctor at some stage with back pain. So, 99% of that back pain is mechanical. So we're looking at the 1% that is inflammatory. So doctors are not really that familiar with that 1% inflammatory, and they don't know what the red flags are for it. It's complicated because it mimics some other diseases. It's commonplace but rare, and yeah, it's very difficult to diagnose. And
in terms of prevalence, Michael, how many people are affected in Canada?
We think the number for axial spondyloarthritis is around 0.6 to 0.7% of the population. I would add that if you include the group spondyloarthritis, we're looking at a little over 1%, 1.2, 1.3%, which actually puts it on a par with rheumatoid arthritis.
Right. So significant prevalence, significant burden. And obviously,
exactly.
when you consider this along with other inflammatory disease, arthritis diseases, it's why we are the leading cause of work disability, for instance, in Canada. So the high prevalence, what ages are affected? And also, can we talk just a little bit about gender as well? Because for a long time, it was one of these types of inflammatory arthritis that seemed to affect men as much as women, or men even more than women. Is that still accurate?
It's not really accurate, but I'll qualify that. Certainly when I was diagnosed, it was said to be a men's disease. and by a ratio of something like 10:1. We now know that that's just not true because women present a little differently. But just coming back to your first point, this is a disease that affects young adults. The age of onset is usually between 15 and 45, somewhere around there. The average age of onset is about 25, 26 years old. So this is a young person's disease. It often hits them in the prime of their sort of educational career and when they're going out into the world to try and build a career. So the burden of it is tremendous. And it's not just the financial burden, it's the burden on relationships and the psychological burden, because people who are very fit and healthy 20-year-olds may suddenly find that by 23 they're having a hard time walking. So it is a young person's disease, yes.
So in terms of both prevalence and incidence, do we see the same numbers in the other ASIF countries?
We do. There's actually quite an interesting infographic on our website, asif.info, and that shows really what the prevalence of axSpA is and the breakdown. So it's quite interesting because it's a spectrum of diseases starting at non-radiographic and it goes through to radiographic. So if we look at the non-radiographic, many more women by a ratio of 2/3 to 1/3 have non-radiographic axial spondyloarthritis. And we don't really know why that is, but when you go through to the radiographic, it's more men than women by 2/3 to 1/3. So when you put the whole spectrum together, it's a 1-to-1 ratio between men and women. But it's not really fully understood why women don't progress through to ankylosing, the sort of bending and fusing of the spine, as much as men do.
Once you do get that diagnosis, what is the prognosis for the patient? Are there any particular challenges in terms of care and treatment?
There are a lot of challenges, yes, because as I've mentioned, typically people get this disease at a fairly young age, so they're looking at it for a lifetime with the disease. And for axial spondyloarthritis, there's relatively limited treatment options in terms of medications. Not as many biologics are available for axSpA as there are for rheumatoid arthritis. So the recommended treatment options, and I'm talking about the recommendations from the, it's called ASAS. So it's the Assessment of Spondyloarthritis International Society, together with EULAR, that's the European League Against Rheumatism, came up with recommendations for the management of axial spondyloarthritis. And so we start with NASA, with non-steroid anti-inflammatories. Sulfasalazine might be useful. Local corticosteroids might be useful. But then you move into the DMARDs and the biological DMARDs, so TNF inhibitors and IL-17 inhibitors. Those are the medications, but in our disease, like many diseases actually, education, exercise, belonging to a patient organization, physical therapy, self-help groups are all very, very important. And especially in axSpA, it's very important to be active and to do therapeutic exercises that maintain flexibility and range of motion, but also to do recreational exercises, because some of the side effects are a sort of constriction of the rib cage, so you need to make sure your lung capacity is quite good. So it's good to walk or swim or something that's cardiovascular exercise as well.
Now, I've spent some time on the ASIF website, and it certainly is rich with information about care and treatment. Can you maybe highlight some of those resources people can find on the website?
Well, yes, we have, well, first of all, we have contact information for all our members. So if you're somebody who suspects or is just recently diagnosed with axSpA, and you're in Algeria or Norway or Australia or Chile, you know, you can go to the website and you can find out what the local association is, what their contact numbers are, and contact emails, etc. So that's one of the first and primary resources that we have. We have a number of those aforementioned infographics. So those provide some information about the prevalence of it and how it affects men and women. What is axial spondyloarthritis? We have quite a lot of stuff on IMAS. IMAS is the International Map of Axial Spondyloarthritis. It's a patient survey. The results from Europe are just coming out. Some of the results have already been released and have been shown as posters at the American College of Rheumatology and the EULAR conferences, etc., and published as well. So that is really useful information, especially if you're just diagnosed, and you can go and look at it and say, wow, I'm not alone. There's all these other people who've answered the survey, and they too suffer from, you know, job insecurity, psychological distress, relationship problems. So that's pretty hard data there that they can get. And one of the things that we did this year, it's not on the website at the moment because World AS Day is over and done with, but it's coming up again May next year. We put a whole bunch of resources on the website that our members, in fact anybody, could use. So there were awareness posters, little videos, you know, logos, etc. Social media posts that people could use to create awareness about World AS Day.
Now, certainly one of the advantages of a federation or coalition is the ability to effectively do campaign advocacy. I know there's an initiative right now underway by ASIF that I think you can tell our viewers a little bit about.
Yes, I think you're speaking of the Delay to Diagnosis project. And this is very important to us. Actually, we're doing this because at our last council meeting, which was in China in 2018, we asked our members what they wanted from us. And one of the priorities was for us to do some work on delay to diagnosis. So just to put that in context, the typical, according to the European data, the typical delay to diagnosis in Europe is just over 7 years, and women take 2 years longer than men to be diagnosed. Why is that important? It's important because we now know that with biological therapies, that the earlier you can treat the disease, the better the outcome. So it's really important to try and reduce that delay to diagnosis down, so people don't get fusion, they don't get they don't get deformed, and they don't suffer a lot of the side effects of the disease, the comorbidities, etc. So we're looking at this, and we've just done a survey of our members to see what resources are out there, and we find that the National Axial Spondyloarthritis Society in the UK is doing exactly this type of work already, and they're willing to share that with us. And the Spondylitis Association of America is doing similar work specifically on non-radiographic axial spondyloarthritis, and they will share that. But what we hope to do is to understand why there is a delay, understand why that is important, and then we want to build data around it and build advocacy tools for that, that we can share with our members so they can go to government, etc., and also create general awareness why it's important. It's a young person's disease that they're stuck with for life. The treatment options are limited. The earlier the treatment, the better the outcome. So there's a lot of things that fall into this delay to diagnosis, and not least the psychological aspect. I mean, if you've been in constant chronic pain for 5, 10, 15, we even hear people not being diagnosed for 20, 25 and 30 years. They're 60 years old, they've been suffering since they were 20 or something. So there's a lot of psychological stress in there, and it's a huge relief for people to finally have a name to their disease, because then they can start managing it.
Finally, Michael, if people are looking for more information or want to get involved in ASIF, you mentioned the website. Maybe you can give us the URL, and also if they're active on social media, maybe a couple of the channels that where people can find it.
Yes, certainly. Our website is www.asif.info, and we have a presence on Twitter at ASIntFed, and that's the same handle for Instagram. And then we also have a Facebook page, which is ASIF-Axial Spondyloarthritis International Federation. So we do post events there, and we post what I like to call knowledge transfer items. So when we get data from IMAS, or we've got some other information that's of pertinence to patients, we post it on the website and on Facebook page.
That's excellent, thank you. And just for our viewers in Canada, if they were looking for specific information in Canada, where would they find the Canadian Spondylitis Association?
Well, they have a website, which is www.spondylitis.ca. It's in English and French, and so it's quite available. It's pretty good. The other two websites that I can recommend are the National Axial Spondyloarthritis Society in the UK, which is nass.co.uk, and the Spondylitis Association of America, which is spondylitis.org. And those are the best sources from patient organizations. Yes.
That's great information, Michael. Thank you so much. We're very happy to be now part of the ASIF family. Look forward to speaking with you soon.
Yes, it's been great to speak with you, Kelly, and welcome aboard to ASIF, and we really look forward to participating in our projects. Thank you.
And thanks to our viewers. Please join us again next week for another episode of Arthritis at Home.